So Trump's latest pardons are reigniting debate over how committed the Justice Department is to fighting public corruption. Among these pardons were individuals convicted of bribery and fraud, and the move has critics accusing the DOJ of political favoritism and double standards. No, it's not. It's not the DOJ. It's not the DOJ. This is President Donald Trump. Let me tell you why. Because I think it's imperative that we go down a lot of the people who have been pardoned by President Trump. These number of individuals are criminals, okay? White-collar criminals to the most part. But nonetheless, let's talk about some of them. Todd and Julie Chrisley, who were reality TV stars convicted of bank fraud and tax evasion. You're going to hear that a lot. Scott Jenkins, a former Virginia sheriff, convicted of bribery and fraud. So that means he was corrupt. That means he was corrupt. Here he is. This is Scott Jenkins on your screen, guys. He was convicted, okay? He was convicted of bribery and fraud. What was he being bribed of, and what was the fraud that he was committing? That's one thing they're not trying to reveal. You also have Blacklogic, the former Democratic governor of Illinois, who was convicted on corruption charges related to bribery. His sentence was commuted in 2020 and received a full pardon in February of 2025. Now, as I'm reading some of these names are going to be unfamiliar. Some of these names are going to be very infamous. You're going to recognize them as soon as I say their names. And in some parts, they are tied, connected, linked to President Trump and some of the things he was accused of in relation to all of these different states and jurisdictions and how people was hush, hush, and closed mouths. So here's the thing. I can agree with President Trump on deporting illegal immigration. I can agree with President Trump in creating a department so we can thwart out fraud, waste, and abuse. There's a lot of things that I can agree with him in. But then there's a lot of things I can't agree with him in. Because now this is more personal. And this is more political theater for him to render the promises that he made to certain people if they just didn't say anything. And I'm not saying this sheriff here who was convicted, okay, this former sheriff here who was convicted, that he and somehow had some part in any criminality that President Trump might have been in. I'm not stating that. But again, there's a lot of ties, links, and connections here. Michelle Foray, a former Republican Las Vegas City Council member convicted of conspiracy and wire fraud related to misused fundraising. Again, money. Brian Kesley, a former Republican Tennessee state senator who was convicted of campaign finance related fraud. Remember when the Trump administration was talking about there were a lot of Republicans on Fox News and a lot of people around the nation was talking about all the fraud waste that was occurring in the Kamala Harris administration and how they were gone on these $1 million and they were paying off people so they can influence certain demographics of people so they can vote for Kamala Harris. This is the same thing, folks. That's why I tell you guys time in and time out that when you pick a side, and people are like, well, you got to pick a side. No, you do not. You don't have to label yourself as a Republican. You don't have to label yourself as a Democrat or independent or a liberal or conservative or libertarian. You don't have to label yourself as anything. You're just an American citizen. And at the end of the day, you do want some part of how the political infrastructure is ran in America. And when you're looking at, the Republican candidate and the Democratic candidate, what policies more align with your goals and what you want in your life, in your family, that's who you vote for. If this 4 years, President Donald Trump was the best pick for you, so you voted for President Donald Trump. The next 4 years, it could be a Democratic nominee. Just don't say, oh, no, I'm never going to vote Democrat because that means that you become a party hoe. I said it. You become a party hoe where No matter what nobody says, no matter what the other side's going to do, you just know that this side is totally evil, thick and through 100% of the time, that there's never going to be a really good candidate on the Democratic side. So you always going to, vote Republican. And then the same for people on the Republican side, on the Democratic side. Oh, I'll never vote Republican because ain't nothing but MAGA and racists over there, and they're only going to do things that are going to enrich their rich friends, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. No. That is when you become a very monolithic voter, and you can't see outside your party. You like a horse with the blinders on. You just keep going straight no matter what happens. Oh, I'm stepping on some volcano lava. Yep, I'm stepping on spikes. You just keep going on in the same path that you're going on. And I believe that's when you become very blind to the politics that we have in this country, and that you need to look at all legislation in both sides. And here's another thing. I wasn't going to even go this long today, but I just have to give it off. Stop judging the people. Stop judging the candidates. Judge their legislation, because one side can demonize the other side to make either side look bad. That's why they always had these political commercials to make one candidate look more evil than the other candidate, which didn't have you to vote. See, a lot of those commercials, now don't get me wrong, in those commercials are a lot of truth, okay? But again, if you want to be a well-educated voter, you're not just going to look at commercials. You're not just going to look at Fox News or CNN. You're going to look at all of that. You're going to assume all of that. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is what's in black and white. What legislations are you going to pass? But let me get back on this list. This list is very important. Paul Walzak, who was a Florida healthcare executive in prison on tax charges. Paul Manafort, his former campaign chairman, convicted of financial crimes. Roger Stone, a political operative and advisor, convicted of lying to Congress, witness tampering, and obstruction. So these guys are doing things all across the board. And as I'm saying these names, I know this is kind of jogging you guys' memory. What about Michael Flynn, his former national security advisor, who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI? Steve Bannon, his former chief strategist, who was facing fraud charges. George Papadopoulos, a former campaign aide who pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Joe Aparo, a former Arizona chief convicted of criminal contempt. Michael Milken, a former financier convicted of racketeering and security fraud. Bernard Kirk, a former New York City police commissioner who served time for tax fraud and false statements. Dinesh D'Souza, I know you guys are familiar with this Indian racist, a conservative commentator convicted of campaign finance violation. And these are some of the same people that people are listening to, that they are painting this very vivid picture of certain demographics or certain political parties while they are committing crimes themselves. And I know a lot of people who are strong right, who are MAGA concentrate, who are Republican conservatives, that they just can't see no wrong on the right side of the house. They're going to say that the liberals convicted these innocent people and pumped them up on charges, even though that a lot of these people committed to the crimes that they were accused of, or they had very significant evidence. That's why I tell you, in the rule of law in America, there's no morals and there's no ethics. I wonder, why didn't President Trump pardon Diddy? I'm just kidding. He shouldn't be pardoned. I'm just kidding. I don't know enough information, but here's another thing about the Diddy case. And I know this is just a one-off very quickly. If you guys are following the Diddy case, what they're coming to a junction in this, in his court case, is that there's really no persecuting, solidifying evidence other than Diddy being a very grotesque freak and these freak offs, other than some very minor crimes like paying off people as far as for them to have sexual acts, that he really didn't do anything illegal. Or they can't prove that he did anything illegal. And I'm not saying I'm for Diddy getting off, okay? I'm pretty sure there's a lot of this information they don't have the evidence for that may went down or occurred. But as a lot of people were stating, who is part of Diddy's ecosystem? Diddy didn't do all this by himself, right? There's a whole entourage of people that surrounds Diddy that were handling a lot of the armed actions of these so-called freaks off and a lot of these egregious sexual encounters that he was having. Again, the first question, don't just, and I know it's very difficult. Throw out your morals, throw out your compassion, throw out your ethics, throw all of it out. And then ask yourself this one simple question. Anything that he did, can they prove that it was against the law? That's all I'm asking. But let me continue here, because I left off with Dinesh D'Souza, I believe, of campaign finance violation. And then 7 Republican congressmen. 7 Republican congressmen. You have Chris Collins, Duncan D. Hunter, Steve Stockman, Rick Renzi, Robin Hayes, Mark Salinger, Randall Duke Cunningham, and at least 10 healthcare executives and doctors convicted in a very large-scale Medicare fraud schemes. Wait a minute. Medicare fraud schemes. And here's another thing, folks. We're going to go over Medicare Advantage. How it's now coming under fire from Doge. And if you had Medicare fraud and now Medicare is going over an audit from Doge, you then pardon the people who was part of the Medicare fraud, waste, and abuse. That is contradictory to the rule of law in America. They committed fraud for a government healthcare plan because they're part of the government. Then we have a government agency doing audit on fraud, waste, abuse, and Medicare. And then you pardon the people who are part of the fraud, waste, and abuse. Boy, white supremacy takes both sides of the argument. Shout out to Neely Fuller. 4 black water guards convicted of killing Iraqi citizens. Charles Kushner, who is the father of his son-in-law, Ivanka Trump husband, who was convicted of tax evasion, witness tampering, and illegal campaign contributions. Many individuals charged or convicted in connection with the January 6, 2021 Capitol riot, Capitol protest, Capitol everything else. And these pardons have drawn strong criticism, with some arguing that they highlight a pullback by the Justice Department from public corruption cases and undermine efforts to hold officials accountable. So it's almost like if you're part of the government, you somehow can, and you have connection to the president, I mean, you're above the law, because anything you do, he like, I'm just going to pardon you. Like, give me a couple of months, put you on house arrest, pay a fine, put you in white collar crime jail. That's kind of like a vacation home for criminals. But I'm going to pardon you guys as soon as I get in office. I'm going to pardon you guys as soon as you commit the crime. These are some of the things I definitely don't agree with the actions of President Trump. And again, a lot of these crimes that they actually have like evidence for, not just hearsay, not just the so-called liberals